This 4-year-old homeless girl was tied to a pole as punishment for stealing food until a millionaire stepped out of his car and did something. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel. To support my work, your help is very important. The relentless March sun beat down on the cobblestones of Maplewood's Central Square when Harrison Tavera pulled his black Mercedes into the sparse shade of a golden oak tree. Heat shimmered off, the asphalt in invisible waves, making the air dance before his eyes as he adjusted his Italian silk tie before stepping out of the car. At 52, Harrison had built an empire in commercial real estate, erecting skyscrapers and residential complexes all over the tri-state area, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was about to witness. His errand was simple: buy a pack of cigarettes at Val's Deli before heading to a meeting with investors. The usual routine, calculated and predictable, like everything in his life. Harrison was known in town for his methodical personality, a man who made no impulsive decisions and measured every word before speaking it. These were the characteristics that had made him one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the region, but they had also made him appear cold to many. It was then that he saw her. In the center of the square, tied to a lamppost with a thick rope, was a child, a girl, by the long, dark hair that fell over her thin face. She couldn't have been more than 6, and her clothes, a faded pink t-shirt and ripped denim skirt, hung loosely on her frail body. What struck Harrison most, however, were her eyes. Enormous, dark brown like deep amber, fixed on the stone ground, as silent tears streamed down her dirty cheeks. "Well, look who decided to show up," Val from Val's Deli called out from his doorway, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Mr. Tavera, you came at just the right time to see how we teach these stray kids who keep stealing around here." Harrison felt something strange in his chest, a pang he couldn't explain. In all his adult life, he had never gotten involved in other people's problems. His philosophy had always been clear: everyone minds their own business, and those who meddle in others' troubles usually get burned. But there was something about that child, tied up like an animal, that ignited a fury he didn't know he possessed. "What did she do?" he asked, approaching the pole. "Stole a bread roll," Val answered proudly, as if he had apprehended a dangerous criminal. "Walked into my shop like a rat and ran off with a baguette. Thought I'd teach her a lesson she won't. Soon forget." The girl lifted her eyes for the first time, and Harrison found himself looking directly into those dark brown irises that seemed to hold an impressive intelligence for someone so young. There was no defiance in that gaze, no anger, only a profound resignation that made something inside him revolt. "How much for the bread?" Harrison asked, pulling his wallet from his pocket. "Oh, it's not about money, Mr. Tavera," Val said, gesticulating with his hands. "It's about principle. If we let these kids do whatever they want, pretty soon they'll be breaking into our homes." "How much for the bread?" Harrison repeated, his voice low but laden with an authority that made Val swallow hard. $2, the shopkeeper mumbled. Harrison pulled a $50 bill from his wallet and handed it to Val. "Here's for 25 bread rolls. Untie." The girl. The silence that followed was broken only by the chirping of robins in the oak branches. Val looked at the bill, then at Harrison, trying to understand what was happening. He had known the businessman for years, knew his reputation as a practical man with no sentimentality. Why on earth was he defending a street kid? "Mr. Tavera, with all due respect, but you don't understand what it's like to deal with these kids every day. If I just let her go, tomorrow there'll be a dozen wanting to do the same thing. Untie the girl, now." There was something in Harrison's tone that brooked no argument. Val grumbled some unintelligible words, but went to the pole and began to untie the rope. As soon as her hands were free, the girl rubbed her bruised wrists, but didn't run. She remained there, observing Harrison with cautious curiosity. "What's your name?" Harrison asked, crouching to her height. "Isadora," she replied, her voice clear despite her evident fear. "Isadora. Beautiful name." Harrison studied the child's face, noticing not only the dirt and signs of malnutrition, but also something deeper. There was a vivacity in her eyes that contrasted with her fragile appearance. "Where are your parents, Isadora?" "I don't have parents. I lived with my grandma Benedicta, but she left 2 months ago." The way she said left made Harrison understand that the child had lost the only person who cared for her. A 6-year-old orphan living alone on the streets of a small town. The situation was more serious than he had imagined. "Where have you been sleeping?" Isadora pointed to a corner of the square where Harrison could see some cardboard piled behind a statue. There, sometimes in front of the bakery when it's too cold. At that moment, Harrison made a decision that would change not only Isadora's life, but his own in ways he couldn't yet imagine. A decision completely contrary to his calculated nature, driven by an impulse he couldn't comprehend. "You're coming with me," he said, standing up. "We'll figure this out." Harrison Tavera's mansion stood majestically atop Eucalyptus Hill, the most exclusive neighborhood in Maplewood. High natural stone walls surrounded the property, and the automatic gate opened silently as the Mercedes approached. Isadora was huddled in the leather passenger seat, her wide eyes absorbing every detail of the house that looked straight out of a magazine. "Wow," she murmured, observing the impeccably manicured garden with its colorful azaleas and the marble fountain at the center of the driveway. "Is this where you live?" "It is," Harrison replied, parking in front of the marble staircase leading to the main door. For the first time since deciding to help the girl, he began to question the wisdom of his decision. What on earth was he going to tell Claire? His wife appeared at the door before he even turned off the engine, as she always did when she heard the car. Claire Tavera, at 48, maintained an impeccable appearance thanks to regular aesthetic treatments and designer clothes that were part of her arsenal to impress local high society. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and she wore a beige linen dress that cost more than many families earned in a month. When she saw Harrison get out of the car, followed by a dirty, ragged child, her face contorted into an expression of distaste that she quickly tried to conceal. "Harrison, darling," she said, descending the steps carefully to avoid stumbling in her high heels. "Who is this child?" "Claire, this is Isadora. She'll be staying with us for a few days," Harrison replied, placing a protective hand on the girl's back. The silence that followed was tense. Claire looked at Isadora as if she were a dangerous animal that had invaded her property. The girl, in turn, seemed to sense the hostility in the air and moved closer to Harrison. "Harrison, can I speak with you privately?" Claire asked, forcing a fake smile. "Isadora, how about you go to the kitchen with Mrs. Henderson? She'll prepare something delicious for you to eat," Harrison said, calling the housekeeper who had appeared at the door. Mrs. Henderson, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the family for over a decade, greeted Isadora with a genuine smile. "Come with me, dear. You must be hungry." As soon as Isadora disappeared inside the house, Claire transformed. Her face twisted into an expression of controlled fury. "Are you completely insane?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "You brought a dirty street kid into our house? What will our neighbors think? And the club? My God, Harrison, did you think about the consequences?" "The girl is an orphan, Claire. She was tied to a pole in the square like an animal. I couldn't just leave her there." "It's not our problem," Claire exploded, forgetting to keep her voice down. "There are institutions for these kinds of situations. You can't just decide to be the savior of all the abandoned children in town," Harrison observed his wife, with a mixture of disappointment and surprise. He knew her appreciation for social appearances, but he hadn't imagined she would be so cold in the face of a child's suffering. "It's just for a few days, until I find a suitable solution for her." "A few days?" Claire laughed bitterly. "Do you think you can get rid of this situation so easily? The girl has already gotten attached to you. Anyone can see that. And what if she refuses to leave? What if she starts bragging about having lived here?" At that moment, Isadora appeared at the kitchen door, holding a glass of milk and a buttered roll that Mrs. Henderson had prepared. Her face was a little cleaner, and she observed the couple with her keen intelligence, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "Can I sleep here tonight?" she asked shyly, addressing Harrison. Before he could answer, Claire intervened with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear. How about you take a bath first? Mrs. Henderson can help you." After Isadora went upstairs with the housekeeper, Claire turned to Harrison with a determined expression. "All right, she can stay tonight, but tomorrow you resolve this situation. I will not allow our reputation to be tarnished because of a misguided impulse of charity." Harrison nodded, but something inside him had already changed. Watching Isadora during dinner, he noticed how she ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the last meal of her life. He also noticed how her eyes caught every detail of the house, memorizing everything with impressive attention for a 6-year-old. "Isadora," he said when they finished eating, "tell me about your grandma. What was she like?" The girl's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't cry. "Grandma Benedicta was very smart. She knew how to read very big numbers and always said I had to pay attention to everything around me. 'Keep everything in your little head, Isadora,' she used to say. 'One day it might be important.'" "What kind of numbers?" Harrison asked, intrigued. "Bank numbers, account numbers. She used to work with that. Sometimes people would come to the house to talk to her about old work." Claire, who had remained silent during the conversation, suddenly became interested. "What kind of people?" "Men in suits. They spoke quietly with Grandma and always asked about what I knew and how much it was worth," Isadora replied, without fully understanding the meaning of her own words. Harrison and Claire exchanged a glance. There was something in that girl's story that didn't fit the image of a helpless orphan living on the streets. That night, after Isadora fell asleep in the guest room, Claire made a decision that would drastically change the course of events. While Harrison worked in his office, she quietly went upstairs and watched the girl sleeping. "Trouble," she whispered to herself. "This girl is pure trouble." She went to her room and opened the medicine cabinet, taking out 2 pills of her strongest anxiolytic. She carefully crushed them and mixed the powder into the glass of milk that Mrs. Henderson had left on the nightstand, in case Isadora woke up thirsty during the night. "A few days of heavy sleep and nightmares will make her want to leave," she murmured, satisfied with her plan. What Claire didn't know was that Isadora, even in her sleep, had the light slumber of someone who had survived on the streets. The girl woke up when she heard footsteps in the hallway and pretended to be asleep as she watched through half-opened eyelids the blonde woman tampering with her glass of milk. Her Grandma Benedicta always said, "Keep everything in your little head, Isadora. One day it might be important." And that night, Isadora stored another piece of information that she didn't know how crucial it would be for her survival. Isadora didn't touch the milk. The next morning, when Mrs. Henderson went up to wake her, she found the glass untouched on the nightstand, and the girl sitting on the bed, watching the gardeners in the yard through the window. "Good morning, dear. Didn't you drink your milk?" "I wasn't thirsty," Isadora replied simply, but her big eyes revealed that she knew exactly why she hadn't drunk it. During breakfast, Claire watched the girl with increasing irritation. Her plan had failed, and Isadora seemed more alert than ever, asking questions about the house, about the paintings on the walls, about the people in the family photographs. "Who's that man in the picture with you, Mr. Tavera?" Isadora asked, pointing to a photograph on the dining room shelf. That's my lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Why do you ask? I've seen him before, the girl said, frowning in concentration. He talked to some men near where I used to sleep. They talked about construction and numbers. Harrison stopped eating, interested. When was this? About 3 weeks ago. They spoke quietly, but I heard some numbers. My grandma always said I had a good memory for numbers. Claire abruptly stood up from the table. Harrison, I need to speak with you. Now. In the office, away from Isadora's ears, Claire exploded. Don't you see what's happening? This girl is making up stories for attention. Kids do that all the time. What if she's not making it up? Harrison questioned. Marcus really works late and some of his business... His business is legitimate, Claire interrupted. Marcus has been your friend for years. You're going to believe a street kid instead of trusting the man who manages your contracts? Harrison remained silent, but a seed of doubt had been planted. He had known Marcus since college. The man had helped build his business empire. But lately some transactions seemed confusing. Some numbers didn't quite add up. Meanwhile, in his downtown office, Marcus Thorne received a call that turned him pale. She's where? He asked into the phone, his voice tense. At Harrison's house, the voice on the other end replied. The girl who always hung around your office. Remember her? Marcus remembered perfectly. Several times he had noticed a child sleeping on cardboard near the building where his office was located. He had even thought of calling Child Protective Services, but the girl never bothered anyone and always disappeared early in the morning. How much could she have heard? He murmured, more to himself. Enough to be a problem, the voice replied, especially if she starts repeating numbers to the right people. Marcus hung up the phone and stared out his office window. At 45, he had built a solid reputation as a lawyer, but for the past 5 years, he had been supplementing his income in ways he preferred not to think about. Small deviations here and there, altered contracts, phantom accounts, nothing that could be easily discovered unless someone had very specific information. And if a 6-year-old child had memorized conversations and numbers she shouldn't have heard. That afternoon, Marcus paid an unexpected visit to Harrison's mansion. He arrived during lunch, knowing his friend would be home. Marcus, what a surprise, Harrison said, welcoming him into the living room. Perfect, I want you to meet someone. When Isadora appeared from the kitchen, Marcus felt his blood run cold. It was her, the girl who slept near his office, who might have overheard confidential conversations during the many late-night meetings he held. Hi, Isadora said, observing him with her intelligent eyes. You're the man from the picture. I remember you. Oh, really? Marcus said, forcing a smile. Where do you know me from? You talked to other men near where I slept. You talked about bank accounts, about building the new bridge, and about how much money would be left over. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, but Harrison noticed how pale his friend had become. Isadora has an impressive memory, Harrison said, studying Marcus's reaction. She can remember numbers with incredible precision. Is that so? Marcus mumbled. How interesting. Can I tell you some of the numbers I remember? Isadora offered innocently. No, Marcus said too quickly, then tried to recover. I mean, numbers can be boring for a girl your age. How about playing in the garden? But Isadora had already begun to recite, account 789452103, transfer of 250,000 to account 231. Stop, Marcus interrupted, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. Harrison looked from Marcus to Isadora, processing what he had just heard. Those numbers, they were too specific to be made up by a child, and his lawyer's reaction was far from normal. Marcus, I think we need to talk, Harrison said, his voice laden with an authority that made the lawyer swallow hard. Of course, of course. But how about later? I have an important meeting now. Marcus left the mansion faster than etiquette recommended, leaving Harrison with more questions than answers. Isadora, observing everything with her keen intelligence, realized she had said something important. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked. "No, Isadora. You may have said something very right." That night, after Isadora went to sleep, Harrison spent hours in his office reviewing contracts and documents that Marcus had prepared in recent years. The more he analyzed, the more irregularities he found. Small discrepancies that individually seemed like calculation errors, but which together formed a troubling pattern. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Marcus made an urgent call. "We need to deal with the girl problem," he said into the phone. "She knows too much." "How do you want me to deal with it?" the voice on the other end asked. "Do you know Big Mike? He handles problems quietly." "Are you sure? A child?" "I'm sure. If she keeps talking, we'll all go down. And you know what happens to people who know too much in this town." On the other end of the line, there was a heavy sigh. "I'll contact him tomorrow." Marcus hung up the phone and poured himself a generous glass of whiskey. In a few days, the problem would be resolved. Isadora would disappear like so many other street children had disappeared in recent months, and no one would ask many questions about another orphan who simply vanished. What he didn't know was that, at that exact moment, a social worker named Dale was on her first day of work in Maplewood, reviewing reports of missing children and asking questions that no one wanted asked. Dale Peterson arrived at the Maplewood Social Services office on a grey March morning, carrying 2 suitcases and a determination that had grown during her 10 years working in the underprivileged neighborhoods of New York City. At 38, she had seen enough to recognize the signs when children disappeared, and no one seemed to genuinely care. The office was in an old building downtown, with peeling paint and furniture that looked like it had survived the 80s. Her new boss, Mrs. Reynolds, a 55-year-old woman who had worked in municipal social services for 2 decades, greeted her with a weary smile. "Welcome, Dale. I hope you have the stomach for what you'll find here." "What do you mean by that?" Mrs. Reynolds opened a drawer and pulled out a voluminous folder. "In the last 8 months, we've had 12 missing children who were experiencing homelessness, all between 5 and 12 years old, all with no known family." Dale flipped through the reports, immediately noticing the pattern. The disappearances always happen at night, there are never witnesses, and the investigations are quickly closed due to lack of evidence. Exactly. The local police classify them as voluntary migrations. They say the children simply leave town looking for better opportunities. 5-year-olds don't voluntarily migrate, Dale said, her voice filled with indignation. "Try explaining that to Detective Miller. According to him, we don't have the resources to investigate assumptions about street kids." Dale spent the rest of the morning studying the cases, mapping the locations of the disappearances and looking for connections that the police had ignored. That's when she found something interesting. Several of the missing children had last been seen near the commercial center, specifically in the area where law offices were located. That afternoon, she decided to scope out the area. Downtown Maplewood bustled with the typical movement of a small American town. Shopkeepers chatted in their doorways, seniors played dominoes in the square, and the smell of fresh bread mingled with the aroma of coffee wafting from bakeries. Dale observed everything with trained eyes, looking for signs that others might ignore. That's when she saw Isadora. The girl was walking next to a well-dressed man, clearly not from the streets like the other missing children. But there was something in her face, an alert liveliness that caught Dale's attention. It was the same look she had learned to recognize in children who had survived difficult situations. "Excuse me," Dale said, approaching Harrison when he stopped at a bookstore. "I'm Dale Peterson, a social worker. Can I ask you a few questions?" Harrison tensed immediately. About what? About missing children in the area. I'm investigating some cases and... Dale paused, noticing how intently Isadora was observing her, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Do you help kids? Isadora asked directly. Yes, I do, dear. It's my job to protect children who need help. Many kids have disappeared from here. Isadora continued, ignoring the warning glance Harrison shot her. Many, Dale confirmed, interested in the girl's perceptiveness. Did you know any of them? I knew Mary. She was 7. She slept near the bakery with me. And Junior, who always shared food when he got some. And Kika... Isadora, Harrison interrupted, uncomfortable with the turn of the conversation. But Dale had already realized something crucial. This girl had lived with several of the missing children. She was a living witness to something everyone preferred to ignore. Sir? Harrison Tavera. Mr. Tavera, could I speak with your daughter privately? Just a few questions about the children she knew. She's not my daughter, Harrison said, quickly. I'm temporarily taking care of her. Dale studied the man in front of her. Expensive clothes, confident posture, but there was something defensive in his attitude. How long? A few days. And before that? She lived on the streets. Dale's heart quickened. A child who survived on the streets when several others mysteriously disappeared. A child who was now under the care of a wealthy man who seemed nervous about simple questions. Mr. Tavera, I'd like to schedule a formal visit. It's standard procedure when a vulnerable child is taken in by a family. Harrison reluctantly agreed, but his mind was already working on the implications. A social worker asking questions, Isadora revealing information about missing children, and Marcus acting suspiciously. The pieces of a dangerous puzzle were beginning to form. That night, as they had dinner, Isadora asked a question that chilled Harrison's blood. Why did the kids I knew disappear? Claire, who had remained silent during the meal, lifted her eyes from her plate. They probably went to other places, dear. Street kids do that. No, Isadora said with certainty. They wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. Mary always said when she was leaving town, she'd tell me first. Isadora, Harrison said carefully, do you remember seeing anyone strange talking to these children before they disappeared? The girl thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was a man who sometimes showed up, big with a scar on his hand. He offered food and said he knew a place where kids could sleep in a real bed. What did he look like? Harrison pressed. Black, tall, always wore a red shirt. The other kids called him Big Mike. The name hit Harrison like a punch. Big Mike, the same man Marcus had mentioned on the phone, thinking no one was listening. The man who handled problems quietly. Claire noticed the change in her husband's expression. Harrison, what is it? Nothing, he lied. I'm just worried about Isadora's safety. But internally, a terrible realization was beginning to take shape. Marcus wasn't just embezzling money from the construction company. He was involved in something much worse. And Isadora, with her prodigious memory and dangerous information, was directly in the crosshairs of people who made children disappear. That night, Harrison was awakened by a strange noise coming from Isadora's room. He got up silently and went to check, finding the girl sitting on the bed, panting and sweating. "Nightmare?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I dreamed about Big Mike," she whispered. "He was looking for me. He said I knew too much." Harrison felt a shiver run down his spine. "It was just a dream, Isadora." "No, it wasn't," she said, looking at him with her big, scared eyes. "My grandma always said I dreamed true things, and in the dream, he said the man in the suit sent him to get me." "What man in the suit?" "The same one who talked to you today, the one in the picture." Marcus. The puzzle was terrifyingly complete. Harrison realized he no longer had time for doubts or cautious investigations. Isadora was in real danger, and he was possibly the only person who could protect her. But what he didn't know was that, a few blocks away, Big Mike had already received his instructions and was beginning to plan how to make another child disappear silently in the dead of night. The next morning, Harrison made a decision that would completely change his routine. He cancelled all his meetings and decided not to leave Isadora alone at home with Claire. There was something in the way his wife looked at the girl that made him uneasy, especially after discovering the untouched glass of milk. "Let's go for a walk around town," he told Isadora during breakfast. "I want you to show me the places where you used to stay." Claire looked up from her newspaper, displeased. "Harrison, you have important appointments today. You can't just go strolling with a child." "Appointments can wait," he replied, noticing how Isadora observed the tension between them with sharp attention. "I can show you where Grandma Benedicta used to live," Isadora offered. "She still has some things there." Their first stop was a small, simple house in the Rose Garden neighborhood, one of the few working-class areas remaining in Maplewood's extended downtown. The house was boarded up by the city, but Isadora knew a back window that didn't close properly. "Grandma always left it open for me to get in if anything happened," she explained, slipping through the opening with agility. Harrison hesitated for a moment, but eventually followed the girl. The interior of the house was simple but organized. Old furniture, yellowed photographs on the walls, and a wooden table covered with carefully organized papers and documents. "She was always messing with these papers," Isadora said, pointing to the table. "She said they were important, that someone would need them one day." Harrison approached and examined the documents. They were old bank statements, handwritten notes, with account numbers and correspondence from a bank he recognized, the same bank where his construction company kept its main accounts. "Isadora, did your grandma work at the bank?" "Yes, she did. She managed numbers for rich people, but one day she found out some men were stealing money, and then they fired her." Harrison felt a chill down his spine. "What men?" "I don't know their names, but she said one of them was a lawyer and knew a lot of important people in town." At that moment, a noise outside alerted them. Harrison looked out the window and saw a black car parked in front of the house. A large black man, wearing a red shirt, got out of the vehicle. "Big Mike," Isadora whispered, recognizing him immediately. "Is there another way out?" Harrison asked urgently. "Through the backyard," she replied, already running towards the back of the house. They managed to get out through the back and circle the block, but Harrison knew they had been discovered. Someone was watching Isadora's movements, and that someone wouldn't hesitate to use violent methods. Back at the mansion, Harrison found Dale waiting in the living room, talking to Claire. The social worker had arrived for her scheduled visit and seemed to be asking too many uncomfortable questions. "Mr. Tavera," Dale said when he entered, "I was just talking to your wife about the circumstances under which you found Isadora." "And what did she say?" Harrison asked, observing Claire suspiciously. "That it was an impulse of charity," Dale replied. "But I'm curious about something. Isadora told me she recognized several missing children. That makes her an important witness." Claire stood up abruptly. "Witness to what? They're just kids who left town." "With all due respect, Mrs. Tavera, 12 children don't just disappear by coincidence," Dale said firmly. "And Isadora might have crucial information about what happened to them." At that moment, Isadora ran into the room, still agitated from her encounter with Big Mike. "Aunt Dale," she exclaimed, recognizing the social worker. "The bad man was at Grandma's house. He was looking for something." "What man?" Dale asked, immediately alert. "Big Mike, the same one who took the other kids." Dale exchanged a meaningful look with Harrison. "Mr. Tavera, we need to talk privately." In the office, Away from Claire and Isadora's ears, Dale got straight to the point. "Your protégé is in real danger. The children she mentioned really did disappear, and all of them were last seen with a man who matches the description of this Big Mike. What do you suggest?" "That we collaborate. Isadora has information that can help unravel what's happening to the missing children. In return, I can ensure official protection for her." Harrison hesitated. Collaborating with an investigation would mean exposing his own problems, especially the irregularities he had begun to discover in Marcus's contracts. But looking at Isadora playing in the garden, he realized he had no choice. "All right, but on one condition. Her safety comes first." "Agreed." That afternoon, while Dale interviewed Isadora about the missing children, Claire made a desperate decision. Her plan with the milk medication had failed. The social worker was asking too many questions, and now Harrison seemed determined to keep the girl at home indefinitely. She needed a more drastic solution. "Hello, Johnson's Pharmacy," she said, into the phone, speaking quietly. "I need something stronger for anxiety, something that works fast." "Mrs. Tavera, you're already on a high dosage. I can't prescribe anything stronger without a doctor's consultation." "It's not for me," she lied. "It's for my niece. She has terrible panic attacks." "How old is she?" 6 years old. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Tavera, psychiatric medication for children requires specialized supervision. I cannot." "Johnson!" Claire interrupted, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "You know my husband has influence in this town. It would be a shame if he decided your pharmacy wasn't following proper protocols." Another silence. Then, reluctantly, "What kind of symptoms is she exhibiting?" "Extreme agitation, insomnia, hallucinations." "I'll prepare something mild, but you assume all responsibility." "Of course." Claire hung up the phone with a satisfied smile. If she couldn't make Isadora leave voluntarily, she would make the girl exhibit such severe symptoms that psychiatric hospitalization would be necessary, and a hospitalized child would be much easier to eliminate from the problem. Meanwhile, in Marcus's office, the lawyer received a call that left him furious. "What do you mean you couldn't get the girl?" he yelled into the phone. "She was with the boss," Big Mike replied, "and there was a social worker at the house. Too many people, too much activity." "Then find a way to do it with less activity," Marcus exploded. "Every day that girl stays alive is one day closer to all of us going down." "Calm down, counselor. I'll take care of it tonight." "How?" "I'll go to the house. If she doesn't come out, I'll go in. And if the boss tries to stop me, do whatever is necessary," Marcus said coldly, "but deal with it quickly." Marcus hung up and poured himself a glass of whiskey with trembling hands. In a few hours, the problem would be resolved. Isadora would disappear like the others, and his corruption network would continue to operate without threats. What he didn't know was that Dale, at that exact moment, was typing a detailed report of her findings and preparing to send copies to the district attorney's office, to the FBI, and to all the newspapers in the region, and that Isadora, with her prodigious memory, had just remembered another crucial detail. The bank account number she had heard Marcus mention was exactly the same one her grandma Benedicta had noted in her papers as a phantom account. Night arrived, laden with dark clouds that threatened rain, typical of late March in rural America. Harrison had spent the entire day with a bad feeling, checking the mansion's windows and doors repeatedly. Isadora noticed his anxiety and stayed close to him, like a scared cub sensing danger in the air. "Mr. Tavera," she said during dinner, "can I sleep in your room tonight? I'm scared." Claire looked up from her plate, irritated. "Scared of what? This is the safest house in town." "Of the man in the red shirt," Isadora replied simply. "He's going to try to get me tonight." "Don't be dramatic," Claire said, but her voice carried a tension that didn't go unnoticed by Harrison. "Kids have nightmares, it's normal." "It's not a nightmare," Isadora insisted. "It's just like when I dreamed Grandma was leaving. I feel it inside," she said, touching her chest. Harrison decided to trust the girl's instinct. "All right, you can sleep in our room tonight." Claire abruptly stood up from the table. "I need to take my medication," she murmured, heading upstairs. In the master bedroom, she carefully prepared a triple dose of the medication she had gotten from the pharmacy. She mixed the powder into the chocolate milk she always gave Isadora before bed, making sure it was well dissolved. "Drink your milk, dear," she said to Isadora, handing her the glass with a forced smile. "It will help you sleep better." Isadora took the glass, but something in Claire's expression alerted her. The girl had learned on the streets to be suspicious when adults were too kind, especially adults who usually didn't like her. "Thank you, Aunt Claire," she said, raising the glass to her lips, but only pretending to drink. When Claire left the room, Isadora ran to the bathroom and poured all the milk down the toilet. Her survival instinct, sharpened by months of living alone, screamed that something was very wrong. It was almost midnight when the first sounds began. Harrison woke to the sound of breaking branches in the garden, as if someone was moving through the plants. He got up silently and went to the window, but couldn't see anything in the darkness. "What is it?" Claire whispered, pretending to wake up. "Maybe it's the wind," he mumbled, but his hand was already reaching for the phone. That's when the garden light came on automatically, revealing a tall, imposing figure near the back of the house. Big Mike had found a way to get onto the property. "Isadora," Harrison whispered urgently, "wake up, but don't make a sound." The girl opened her eyes immediately, completely alert. "He's here," she said, without needing to ask who. "Let's go out the front," Harrison said, grabbing his car keys. But when they went downstairs, they discovered they weren't alone. Big Mike had managed to force open the back door and was standing in the living room, his imposing presence filling the space. "Mr. Tavira," he said in a calm but menacing voice, "we don't want any trouble. We just came for the girl." "She's not going anywhere," Harrison replied, placing himself between Big Mike and Isadora. "Look, counselor, you seem like a good man. You don't need to get involved in this. The girl knows things she shouldn't know, and that's causing problems for a lot of important people." "What kind of problems?" Big Mike smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. "The kind of problems that made other kids disappear silently in recent months." Isadora held Harrison's hand tightly. "I saw what happened to Mary," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "You promised she would get food and a place to sleep, but she never came back." "And she's not coming back," Big Mike said coldly, "just like you won't come back if you come with me now peacefully." It was at that moment that Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, but instead of looking scared, there was an expression of satisfaction on her face. "Finally," she said. "I thought you'd never get rid of this problem." Harrison turned to his wife, shocked. "Claire, you called him here." "Of course I did," she exploded. "Did you think I was going to sit quietly watching our life being destroyed because of a street kid? Our reputation, our friends, all thrown away because of a child who isn't even ours." "My God," Harrison murmured, finally understanding the extent of the betrayal. "The medication in the milk. You were trying to—" "I was trying to solve the problem discreetly," Claire said, coming down the stairs, "but you didn't cooperate. So I had to call someone more efficient." At that moment, sirens began to wail in the distance. Big Mike tensed, looking towards the door. "Police?" he asked. "It must be the social worker," Isadora said. "I asked her to keep an eye on the house tonight." It was true. Dale, worried about the information she had collected about the missing children, had asked a police patrol team to make extra rounds at Harrison's mansion during the night. "Damn it," Big Mike cursed. "I can't be caught here." He quickly moved towards the back of the house, but before leaving, he looked directly at Isadora. "Girl, you can't run forever, and your protector here won't be able to protect you from everything. There are many ways to make a child disappear without a trace." The sirens grew louder, and Big Mike vanished into the darkness of the garden as quickly as he had arrived. When the police arrived, they found Harrison protectively embracing Isadora, while Claire tried to explain that it had all been a misunderstanding, that no one had broken into the house. "Are you sure you saw someone?" the sergeant asked. "Absolutely," Harrison replied, "and I have reason to believe my wife facilitated his entry." Claire paled. "Harrison, are you crazy? How can you accuse me of such a thing?" But Isadora, with her prodigious memory, began to recite details of the conversation she had overheard between Claire and someone on the phone earlier, including fragments of phrases that perfectly matched what had happened. She said, "Finally, I thought I'd never get rid of this problem." Isadora repeated with impressive accuracy, and before that, on the phone, she talked about resolving it tonight. The sergeant looked from Harrison to Claire, processing the information. "Madam, do you have any explanation for this?" "The girl is making it up," Claire said desperately. "She's a traumatized child who invents stories." "Did she also invent the big man in the red shirt who broke into our house?" Harrison asked coldly. At that moment, Dale rushed in, having been alerted by the police about the incident. "Is everyone all right?" she asked, examining Isadora for signs of injury. "For now," Harrison said, "but I think it's time you knew everything we've discovered about the missing children." Over the next 2 hours, at the precinct, Isadora told everything she knew about Big Mike, about the other children, about the men in suits who talked to her grandma, and about the numbers she had memorized from conversations near Marcus's office. Dale recorded every word, realizing that she finally had the pieces needed to dismantle the entire network. "Isadora," she said gently, "you are a very brave girl. This information will help save other children." "What about the ones who already disappeared?" Isadora asked. "Mary, Junior, Kika, will they come back?" Dale exchanged a somber look with Harrison. They both knew that some answers were too cruel for a 6-year-old child. "We'll do everything we can," Dale promised. But what none of them knew was that Marcus, upon learning that Big Mike had failed and that the police were involved, was already preparing his last card, a plan that would not only eliminate Isadora as a witness, but also destroy Harrison as a potential whistleblower, using fabricated evidence that would implicate the businessman in the very crimes the lawyer had been committing for years. Dawn found Harrison and Isadora in a simple hotel room downtown Maplewood. After the events of the night, he didn't feel safe taking the girl back home, especially with Claire still there. His wife's betrayal had been a blow he was still processing, but his priority now was to keep Isadora safe. "Mr. Tavera," she said, sitting on the bed and watching the street activity through the window, "why doesn't Aunt Claire like me?" The simple question carried a pain that made Harrison's heart clench. How to explain to a 6-year-old the fears and prejudices of an adult woman? "Some people are afraid of change, Isadora, and you came and changed a lot in our house." "But I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, her voice small. "I just wanted a safe place to sleep." "I know, little one, and you'll have that, I promise." At that moment, Harrison's phone rang. It was Dale. "Harrison, I need to meet you urgently. I have news about the investigation." "Good or bad?" "Complicated. Can you come to the precinct?" An hour later, Harrison and Isadora were in the precinct's interrogation room, where Dale waited for them with a worried expression and a folder full of documents. "What did you find out?" Harrison asked. "First, the good news," Dale said. "Based on Isadora's testimony, we were able to identify Big Mike. His real name is Robert Bobby Silas, and he has a history of involvement in crimes against children in other cities. And the bad news? He disappeared, and that's not all. Dale hesitated, looking at Isadora. Maybe it's better if we talk privately. No, Harrison said. Isadora has a right to know what's happening. She's the one most affected by all of this. Dale sighed. All right. Harrison, Marcus Thorne filed a formal complaint against you this morning. Against me? Why? He's claiming you're the mastermind behind the corruption crimes at the construction company. Says he recently discovered the irregularities and that when he tried to confront you, you threatened to use Isadora as an alibi, inventing this whole story about missing children. Harrison paled. That's impossible. He knows I discovered his embezzlement. There's more, Dale continued. Claire gave a statement confirming Marcus's version. She said you'd been acting strangely ever since you brought Isadora home, and that she suspected you were using the girl for some scheme. The silence that followed was broken by Isadora's clear voice. They're lying. I know they are, dear, Dale said gently, but now we need to prove it. I can prove it, Isadora said with a determination that surprised the adults. I remember everything I heard, all the numbers, all the conversations. I can say it all again. Isadora, Harrison said carefully, this could be dangerous. If you testify against Marcus, he'll do everything to hurt me, she finished. He's already trying to do that. But if I don't speak, other children will disappear like Mary did. The courage of that 6-year-old girl left Harrison speechless. Here was a child who had lost everything, who had been betrayed by the very adults who should have protected her, and yet was willing to risk herself to protect other children. All right, he said, but we'll do this right, with protection, with lawyers, with everything necessary. That afternoon, while Dale arranged official protection for Isadora, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson, the mansion's housekeeper, showed up at the hotel looking for Harrison. Mr. Tavera, she said, visibly nervous, I need to talk to you. It's about Mrs. Tavera. What happened? She's not in her right mind, sir. Ever since you left the house, she hasn't stopped talking to herself, breaking things, and there are some strange men showing up there. What kind of men? Men in suits. They talk to her in the living room, always with the door closed. And after they leave, she gets even more agitated. Isadora tugged on Harrison's sleeve. They're the same men who talked to my grandma, she said. I'm sure. Mrs. Henderson, Harrison said. Were you able to hear anything they were talking about? A little, yes, sir. They talked about solving the girl problem once and for all, and about using the wife to incriminate the husband. And there's something else. What? Mrs. Tavera asked me to buy very strong medicine from the pharmacy. She said it was for her to sleep, but, sir, the amount she bought would be enough to kill a horse. Harrison's blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson, do you think I think she's planning something very bad, Mr. Tavera. That's why I came looking for you. At that moment, Harrison's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Harrison, it's Marcus. We need to talk. I have nothing to discuss with you. Yes, you do. It's about Isadora and about your wife. Harrison felt a chill down his spine. What do you mean? Claire has been very unstable since yesterday. She made a drastic decision. If you don't bring the girl to my office in an hour, I won't be able to guarantee your wife's safety. Are you threatening Claire? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm trying to avoid a tragedy. Claire bought enough medicine to solve her problems definitively. The only thing that can make her change her mind is knowing that the girl's problem has been solved. Harrison understood what was happening. Marcus was using Claire's fragile mental state to force him to hand over Isadora. And knowing his wife, he knew she was capable of taking extreme action in her current state. 1 hour. Marcus repeated. My office. Bring the girl, or you'll be responsible for 2 tragedies instead of 1. The call ended, leaving Harrison in an impossible situation. Handing over Isadora meant condemning her to the same fate as the other missing children, but not handing her over could mean Claire's life. What's wrong? Dale asked, noticing the despair on his face. Harrison told her about the call, the threat, the impossible situation he was in. It's a trap, Dale said immediately. Marcus knows you won't sacrifice Isadora, so he's betting you'll try to save both and end up giving yourself up. What if Claire really... Harrison, Isadora interrupted, her voice calm but determined. You can't choose between me and her, but I can choose for myself. What do you mean? I want to go, she said, but not alone. I want you and Aunt Dale to come with me. And I want the police to know where we are. Isadora, it's very dangerous. Everything is dangerous now, she said with a wisdom beyond her 6 years. But if we do it right, maybe we can save everyone, even Aunt Claire. Dale looked at that extraordinary girl and made a decision that would change everything. All right, let's do this, but our way. What none of them knew was that Marcus wasn't just planning to eliminate Isadora. He had set a trap that would eliminate all witnesses at once, including Harrison and Dale, while making everything look like a tragic accident involving a disturbed child and the adults who tried to protect her. Dale's plan was risky, but it was all they had. As they headed to Marcus's office, she maintained constant contact with a civil police team that would be positioned around the building. Harrison drove in silence, the knots in his stomach tightening with every block. Isadora, Dale said, turning to the girl in the back seat. Are you sure you can remember all the numbers you heard? Yes, I am, she replied, her voice firm despite the visible fear in her eyes. My grandma always said my head was like a recorder. I remember everything. And are you sure you want to do this? Isadora looked out the window, watching the familiar streets of Maplewood quickly pass by. If I don't, other children will disappear and Aunt Claire might get hurt. Marcus's office was on the 3rd floor of a commercial building downtown. It was a place Harrison knew well, having visited countless times over the years for business. But today, climbing those familiar stairs, he felt as if he were walking into a death trap. Remember, Dale whispered as they ascended, always keep the conversation directed towards the hidden microphones on our clothes. The police need to hear everything. On the 3rd floor, the office door was ajar. Marcus awaited them, seated behind his imposing desk, but he wasn't alone. Claire was in an armchair beside him, visibly under the influence of medication, her eyes glazed over and fixed on nothing. Punctuality. I've always admired that about you, Harrison, Marcus said without rising. And I see you've brought company. As agreed, Harrison replied, keeping Isadora close. Now release my wife. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Release? Harrison, you haven't grasped the situation. Claire is here by her own choice. Tell them, my dear. Claire slowly lifted her eyes, as if emerging from a deep sleep. I can't take it anymore, she said, her voice slurred. All this confusion, all this shame, it's better to end it all at once. Claire, what did you take? Harrison asked, alarmed. Enough not to feel anything anymore, she replied. And when this conversation is over, I'm taking the rest. Dale immediately understood. Marcus's ploy. He had drugged Claire enough to make her malleable, but not enough to kill her yet. He was using her as leverage to ensure they wouldn't try anything during the conversation. What do you want, Marcus? Harrison asked directly. I want this whole situation resolved cleanly, the lawyer replied, standing up and walking to the window. Isadora is a very intelligent girl, but also very dangerous. She heard things that could destroy many important lives in this city. She's just a child. She's a child who can bring down schemes that move millions of dollars. Marcus, said coldly. "Do you know how many important families depend on these financial arrangements? How many jobs? How many businesses? That doesn't justify making children disappear," Dale exploded. Marcus turned to her with a cold smile. "Ah, the idealistic social worker. You really believe you can save the world, don't you?" At that moment, Isadora stepped forward, her clear voice cutting through the tension in the air. "Where's Mary?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked at the girl, and for the first time, Dale saw something akin to discomfort in his expression. "Who?" "Mary. She was 7 and had curly hair. Big Mike took her, saying he'd give her food and a place to sleep." "Where is she?" "Girl, I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Isadora said, her voice gaining strength. "You paid him to take her, and Junior too, and Kika. Where are all the children?" Marcus walked to his desk and opened a drawer. For a terrible moment, Harrison thought he was going to pull out a gun, but instead, Marcus took out a thick envelope. "Harrison, here are the documents that prove your involvement in the embezzlement from the construction company. Your signature, your bank accounts, all very well documented." "That's impossible. I never signed any of that." "Of course not. But you will sign now," Marcus said, placing the papers on the desk. "You will confess that you used Isadora as part of a scheme to divert attention from your own crimes, and in return, your wife will receive the antidote for what she took." Dale realized the time had come. "Marcus Thorne," she said loudly and clearly, "are you publicly confessing involvement in child disappearances and blackmail?" "I'm not confessing anything," he replied, but there was nervousness in his voice. "I'm just trying to resolve a complicated situation." "Resolving it how?" Dale insisted. "By making more children disappear?" At that moment, Isadora did something no one expected. She approached Marcus's desk and began to recite numbers aloud. "Account 78945210 transfer of $250,000 on January 15th. Account 2317689 deposit of $300,000 on February 22nd. Beneficiary, Phantom Company Green Mountain Construction." Marcus paled. "Shut up!" But Isadora continued, her prodigious memory spewing numbers, dates, and values with mathematical precision. Every word was concrete evidence of the crimes Marcus had been committing for years. Meeting on March 5th. Participants: Mr. Thorne, grey-haired man from the City Hall, woman with glasses from the bank. Subject: how to distribute the $400,000 from the new bridge contract. "I said shut up," Marcus yelled, advancing towards the girl. It was then that Harrison placed himself between them, but Marcus was too desperate to be intimidated. He pushed Harrison hard, causing him to stumble over a chair. "You don't understand," Marcus screamed. "These children had no future anyway. They were just street kids who were going to die on the streets anyway. At least this way they served a purpose." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of footsteps rushing up the stairs. The confession had been captured by the microphones, and the police team was ascending. But Marcus still had one last card to play. He ran to where Claire was sitting and brutally pulled her by the hand. "If you try to arrest me, she dies," he yelled, holding a vial of medicine. "The antidote is here with me, and only I know the correct dosage." It was at that moment that Claire, even under the influence of the medication, finally understood the extent of what she had helped create. She looked at Isadora, saw the fear in the eyes of that 6-year-old child, and something inside her completely broke. I helped do this," she murmured, tears streaming down her pale face. "My God, what have I done?" "Claire, don't move!" Harrison yelled, seeing Marcus squeeze his wife's arm. But Claire, in a last act of redemption, used the little strength she had left to push Marcus away from her, making him stumble and drop the vial of medicine. "Save! "Save the girl," she whispered before collapsing. That's when the doors burst open and armed police officers stormed the office, finding Marcus trying to reach the vial on the floor and Isadora reciting more incriminating numbers as if her life depended on not forgetting a single detail. St. Jude's Hospital in Maplewood had never seen such a complex case. Claire was in the ICU, fighting the effects of the medication she had ingested, while a team of doctors worked to neutralize the intoxication. Marcus, handcuffed to a gurney in the emergency wing, had refused to reveal which specific antidote would be needed, claiming he would only speak through an agreement with the district attorney's office. "How is she?" Harrison asked Dr. Emily Hayes, the physician in charge of the case. "Stable but critical," the doctor replied, taking off her glasses and nervously cleaning them. "We've identified most of the substances in her blood, but there's a compound we don't recognize. It might have been something this Marcus specifically added." Isadora was sitting in a chair in the hallway, swinging her legs and observing the hospital's activity with her big, attentive eyes. Even after all she had been through, she seemed to be the calmest person in that tense environment. "Mr. Tavera," she said when he approached, "is Aunt Claire going to be okay?" "The doctors are doing everything they can," he replied, crouching beside the chair. "How are you feeling?" "Hungry," she said simply, "and worried, but also a little happy." "Happy?" "Because now everyone knows the truth about the other kids, and because Aunt Claire saved me in the end." The simplicity with which Isadora processed complex situations continued to impress Harrison. At 6 years old, she could see beyond the malice she had faced and recognize Claire's gesture of redemption. Dale approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a juice box for Isadora. "I have news about the investigation," she said, sitting beside them. Marcus's confession was fully recorded, and with the numbers Isadora provided, we've traced the entire corruption network. "What about the other children?" Harrison asked, though he feared the answer. Dale hesitated, looking at Isadora. "Some have been found alive. 3 of them, yes. They were being held on a rural property 50 miles from here. Big Mike was using them to transport documents and money between cities, taking advantage of the fact that no one suspects children." Isadora's eyes lit up. "Was Mary there?" "Yes, she was, dear. She's at the hospital now, but she'll be fine." For the first time in days, Isadora genuinely smiled. "Can I see her?" "Of course you can. She asked about you." At that moment, Detective Miller, the same one who had neglected the investigations into the missing children, appeared in the hallway with a sheepish expression. "Mr. Tavera," he said, approaching hesitantly, "I'd like to apologize for the misunderstandings during the investigation." Harrison stared at him coldly. "Misunderstandings? Detective, 12 children disappeared under your jurisdiction, and you classified it all as voluntary migration." There were political pressures not to investigate too deeply. Some important people in town. People who were involved in the scheme," Dale completed. "People who paid you to look the other way while children were abducted." The detective lowered his head. "I never imagined it would come to this. I thought they were just financial irregularities." "And that made it okay?" Isadora asked, her voice small, but carrying a moral authority that made the detective wince. "No, child. It didn't make anything okay." 2 hours later, Dr. Hayes brought news about Claire. "We were able to stabilize her," she said, "but it will be a long recovery. The damage to her kidneys and liver was significant." "Will she survive?" Harrison asked. "With proper treatment, yes. But she'll never be the same person physically." "And mentally?" The doctor hesitated. "That will depend on how she processes everything that happened. Guilt can be a very heavy burden to carry." That afternoon, an unexpected discovery completely changed the course of the investigation. When the police searched Isadora's late grandmother's house more carefully, they found a hidden compartment behind a false wall in the bedroom. "Harrison, you need to see this," Dale said on the phone, her voice filled with excitement. In the small hiding place, Benedicta had kept years of evidence about the corruption at the bank where she had worked. Documents, old cassette tape recordings, photographs of secret meetings, all meticulously organized and dated. "Your grandma was a very brave woman," Dale told Isadora as they examined the material. "She collected evidence for years, waiting for the right moment to expose everything." "Why didn't she ever report it?" Isadora asked. "Because they threatened to hurt you if she spoke up," Dale replied softly. "She chose to protect you instead of seeking justice. But now, justice will be done. Yes, it will. Thanks to you and the evidence your grandma left behind." Among the documents, there was a sealed letter with Isadora's name on it. Dale carefully opened it and read aloud, "My dearest granddaughter, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me and bad people are trying to hurt you. All the evidence is here, all the names are noted. You have always been smarter than any adult I've known, and I know you'll know what to do with this information. Remember, you are not just a special girl, you are the key for many families to recover the money that was stolen from them. I love you more than anything. Grandma Benedicta." Isadora's eyes filled with tears, but not from sadness. It was a cry of understanding, of finally grasping the sacrifice her grandmother had made for her. "She knew I would need these things," she said. "That's why she taught me to keep everything in my head." "Your grandma was a hero," Harrison said, "and so are you." That night, at the hospital, a decisive conversation took place between Harrison and Claire. She had awakened from sedation and, for the first time since everything began, seemed truly aware of the gravity of her actions. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice weak but clear, "can you forgive me? Claire, you almost allowed a child to die." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her pale face. "I was so afraid of losing our life, our social standing, that I forgot what life truly matters. Isadora's life always mattered. I know that now, and I know I'll never be able to forgive myself." Harrison remained silent for a long moment, processing not only the betrayal, but also his wife's apparent transformation. "Claire, you'll have to live with the consequences of what you did. But if you've truly changed, you can start by helping with the investigation. Tell us everything you know about the people involved." "I'll tell everything," she promised. "Every name, every conversation, every transaction I witnessed." In the hallway, Isadora was sleeping in a chair, curled up, like a kitten, when Mary appeared in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. "Izzy!" Mary shouted, using the affectionate nickname she gave her friend. Isadora woke up immediately and ran to hug the friend she thought she had lost forever. "I knew you would save me," Mary said, squeezing Isadora in her thin arms. "I knew you would remember everything and tell the right people." "I promised my grandma I would keep everything in my head," Isadora replied. "And I promise you that no one will hurt children in Maplewood ever again." It was a big promise for a 6-year-old girl to make, but looking at her at that moment, surrounded by adults who finally understood her worth, reunited with the friend she had helped save, holding information that would bring justice to dozens of families, everyone knew it was a promise she could keep. What none of them imagined was that the discovery of Benedicta's hiding place would reveal not only local crimes, but a corruption network that extended far beyond Maplewood, involving state and federal politicians on a scale that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The revelation of the true extent of the corruption came 3 days later, when federal prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office landed in Maplewood with a full team of investigators. The evidence found in Benedicta's hiding place was not limited to the small town. It mapped a network that siphoned public funds from dozens of municipalities. Mr. Tavera, said Federal Prosecutor Monica Hayes, a 45-year-old woman with a stern appearance but kind eyes. "We need Isadora's full cooperation. The information she memorized could be the key to dismantling a scheme that diverts millions of dollars every month." Harrison looked at Isadora, who was sitting beside him in the district attorney's meeting room, swinging her legs in the high chair and drawing birds on a sheet of paper. "She's just a 6-year-old child," he said. "She's been through enough. Trauma?" "I understand your concern," the prosecutor replied, "but the information she possesses can recover money stolen from hospitals, schools, child nutrition programs. We're talking about resources that could have saved lives." Isadora stopped drawing and looked up. "How many children can be helped if I tell everything I know?" "Thousands," Monica answered sincerely. "The stolen money could build 10 children's hospitals." "Then I'll tell," Isadora said with determination, "but only if Mr. Tavera stays with me." For the next 4 hours, Isadora recited numbers, dates, names, and conversations with a precision that impressed even the most experienced investigators. Her memory not only confirmed the evidence left by Benedicta, but filled crucial gaps in the investigation. "The meeting was on December 13th, she said, closing her eyes to concentrate. "The man with the grey mustache said that the school contracts for Springfield were approved, but the money would be divided between him, Mr. Thorne, and 3 other people." "Do you remember the names of those people?" Monica asked. "Congressman Davis, the lady from the bank. She had a tiny voice, and a man they called the Colonel." The investigators exchanged glances. Congressman Davis was a well-known figure for his influence in the region, and the mention of a colonel opened even more troubling possibilities. "Isadora," Monica said gently, "do you remember anything else about this colonel?" "He didn't like kids," she said simply. "He always said, 'Kids are just trouble, and the fewer the better.' It was his idea to use street kids to carry money from one city to another." The silence in the room was heavy. The coldness with which children had been treated as disposable objects shocked even professionals accustomed to serious cases. That afternoon, a coordinated operation was launched simultaneously in 12 cities in the region. Arrest warrants were served, bank accounts were frozen, and documents were seized on a scale that surprised even the investigators themselves. But it was in Maplewood that the most significant arrest occurred. The colonel, mentioned by Isadora, was none other than Colonel Reynolds, a local businessman who controlled several transportation companies and had contracts with city halls throughout the region. Dale accompanied the arrest, and it was she who made the most shocking discovery. "Harrison," she said on the phone, her voice trembling, "we found where they kept the children before they made them disappear." "Where?" "On a property belonging to Colonel Reynolds, 60 miles from here. There was a kind of adapted warehouse with small cells where they kept the children while they trained them to transport money." Harrison's stomach churned. "How many children passed through there?" "We're still investigating, but we found records of at least 30 children in the last 2 years. "And the ones they didn't find alive?" Dale couldn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was just a whisper. "There was a clandestine cemetery on the property." That night, Harrison couldn't hide the reality from Isadora. She noticed his dejection and insisted on knowing what had happened. "Some of the children who disappeared won't be coming back," he said carefully. They passed away, like your grandma passed away." Isadora remained silent for a long time, processing the information with her premature maturity. "They suffered because of things I knew and didn't tell before," she finally said. "No, Isadora, they suffered because of bad men who made bad choices. You were just a child trying to survive. But if I had told the numbers before, if you had told before, you probably would have disappeared too," Harrison said firmly. "You did exactly what your grandma taught you. You kept everything in your head until the right moment to speak." The next day, Unexpected news brought a momentary relief amidst so much tragedy. Mary, who was recovering in the hospital, made a revelation that changed everything they thought they knew about the fate of the missing children. Not all the children died, she told Dale during an interview. Some were sold. Sold? To whom? To families in other cities, rich families who wanted children but didn't want to go through the normal adoption processes. The information opened a new line of investigation. If some children had been sold instead of killed, it meant there was hope of finding more survivors. "Do you remember how many children were sold?" Dale asked. "I remember at least 5 who left the warehouse with different families. Junior was one of them. He went to a family in Springfield." Isadora, who had insisted on being present during the conversation, asked, "How do you know all this, Mary?" "Because I was Big Mike's favorite. He thought I was smart and used me to take care of the younger kids. I saw everything, but I pretended not to understand." "You're very brave," Isadora said. "No braver than you. You were the only one who managed to escape and still memorized everything we needed to catch them." That afternoon, the first of the sold children was located. Junior, 8 years old, was living with a family in Springfield who believed they had legally adopted an orphaned child. When the police arrived at the house, the boy immediately recognized the photos of Isadora and Mary. "Izzy, Mary," he shouted, even through the photographs. "You guys got out." The family who had adopted him was shocked to discover they had been deceived. They thought they were saving an orphaned child, but in reality, they had been an involuntary part of a criminal scheme. "We paid $50,000, the adoptive mother said, crying. "They said it was to cover the legal costs of the adoption." "You were deceived as much as the children were," Dale said. "But now Junior needs to be reunited with the other children so we can fully understand what happened." By the end of that week, a special hearing was scheduled at the Maplewood courthouse. For the first time in decades, the city saw a popular mobilization of such magnitude. Entire families came to support the children who had survived and to protest against the crimes that had been committed. Isadora, wearing a blue dress that Harrison had bought especially for the occasion, went up to the stand to give her final testimony. "My name is Isadora Santos Silva," she said, her clear voice echoing through the crowded courtroom. "I am 6 years old, and I want to tell everyone what I saw and what I heard." For an hour, she recited numbers, names, and events with a precision that mesmerized the entire audience. When she finished, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. "Why did you memorize all of this?" the judge asked. "Because my grandma Benedicta taught me that sometimes children are the only ones who can tell the truth that adults don't want to hear." It was at that moment that the biggest twist in the whole story was revealed. The judge, Judge Robert Miller, held up a document that had arrived that morning. "Isadora," he said, "there's something you need to know about your grandma Benedicta and why she kept all this evidence." The document revealed that Benedicta had not just been a bank employee who discovered irregularities. She had been the main witness in a much larger corruption case, a case that had been covered up 20 years earlier, resulting in the injustice that allowed the entire current scheme to exist. The document the judge held would forever change everyone's understanding of Benedicta Santos Silva and her true importance in Maplewood's history. With trembling hands, Judge Robert Miller read aloud to the entire courtroom. Benedicta Santos Silva, a senior employee at the Regional Valley Bank, was the main witness in the corruption case involving the embezzlement of $15 million in 2003. Her testimony resulted in the arrest of 7 people, including the then mayor and 2 city council members. Isadora listened to every word with increasing attention, trying to understand what it meant. However, the judge continued, the case was overturned on appeal due to procedural irregularities. All the accused were released, and Benedicta Santos was forced to sign a perpetual gag order under threat of defamation lawsuits. A murmur swept through the courtroom. People began to understand that the current injustice had much deeper roots. Most shockingly, Judge Miller said, holding up another document, the lawyer responsible for overturning the case and silencing Benedicta Santos was none other than the young Marcus Thorne, freshly graduated and already showing his willingness to corrupt justice in exchange for money. Harrison felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Marcus hadn't become corrupt over the years. He had started his career by destroying Benedicta's life and allowing criminals to escape unpunished. "This means," Isadora said, her tiny voice echoing through the silent courtroom, "that my grandma always knew who Mr. Thorne was." "It means more than that, dear," Judge Miller replied. "It means your grandma spent 20 years collecting evidence not only about the current crimes, but about how the justice system was corrupted to protect the original criminals." Dale stood up in the audience. "Your Honor, this explains why Benedicta taught Isadora to memorize numbers and conversations. She was preparing her granddaughter to be the witness she could never fully be." "Exactly," the judge confirmed. Benedicta knew that the same criminals from 20 years ago were still active, now with an even larger network. She prepared Isadora as her legacy, a witness they couldn't silence as they had silenced her. At that moment, Marcus, who was present in the courtroom as a defendant, exploded in rage. "This is all lies," he yelled, trying to stand up, even while handcuffed. Benedicta was a disgruntled employee who made up stories to promote herself. "No, Mr. Thorne," the judge said coldly, "you have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you do so." But Marcus was beyond reason. 20 years of crimes weighed on his conscience, and the prospect of seeing everything crumble had driven him to despair. "You don't understand," he continued shouting. "Without our system, this town would have nothing. No investment, no development. We sacrifice some street children for the greater good." The silence that followed was deafening. Even his own lawyers seemed shocked by the public confession. "Some street children," Isadora repeated, standing up from her chair. "Mary isn't some children. Junior isn't some children. Every child you hurt had a name, had dreams, had a right to live." Her voice, though that of a 6-year-old girl, carried a moral authority that made the entire courtroom fall into absolute silence. "My grandma taught me that all people matter," she continued. "The rich and the poor, the big and the small. And she taught me that when someone hurts a child, it's everyone's job to help that child." When Isadora finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the people in the courtroom began to stand in applause. First, it was the families of the missing children, then the local shopkeepers, then the entire audience was on its feet, applauding a 6-year-old girl who had had the courage to speak truths that many adults could not utter. In the weeks that followed, the revelations continued. The investigation expanded to other cities, other states, revealing a corruption network that involved high-ranking politicians and influential businessmen. But it was in Maplewood that justice began to be done most concretely. The money recovered from the frozen bank accounts was enough to build 2 new children's hospitals, renovate all municipal schools, and create a permanent fund for child and adolescent protection. Mary and Junior, along with the other rescued children, began a long process of psychological recovery. Dale personally coordinated the reintegration program, ensuring that each child received not only medical care, but also education and emotional support. "How are they adapting?" Harrison asked during one of his visits to the rehabilitation center. "Better than we expected," Dale replied. "Children have an incredible capacity for healing when they receive adequate love and care. Mary is already talking about wanting to be a social worker when she grows up. And Junior, he wants to be a police officer to protect other children. Isadora, who had become a constant presence at the center, played with the other children as if they were her younger siblings. Her experience as a survivor made her a natural bridge between the trauma they had suffered and the hope of a better future. A month after the hearing, Claire was discharged from the hospital. Her physical recovery had been slow, but her emotional transformation was even more remarkable. The vain woman concerned with appearances had become someone deeply aware of the value of human life. "Harrison," she said when they met for the first time since her hospitalization, "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope for your permission to try to mend some of the harm I caused. What do you have in mind?" "I want to use my experience with local high society to identify other families who might be involved in similar schemes. I know the signs now, the money that appears without explanation, the conversations that stop when someone approaches." It was a form of redemption that Harrison hadn't expected, but that made sense. Claire had been part of the problem. Now she wanted to be part of the solution. "What about Isadora?" Claire asked. "Can she forgive me one day?" "Why don't you ask her yourself?" The encounter between Claire and Isadora took place in the garden of the house, where the girl had suffered so much. But now the space had been transformed into a true sanctuary, with colorful flowers and a new birdhouse for the birds Isadora loved so much. "Hi, Aunt Claire," Isadora said when she saw her approaching with difficulty, still recovering from the effects of the medication. "Hi, Isadora, how are you?" "Good. And you?" "Better than I deserve," Claire replied honestly. "Isadora, I want to apologize for everything I did. I know I can't undo it, but—" "Aunt Claire," Isadora interrupted, "you saved me in the end. When you had to choose between helping me or helping the bad man, you chose me. But before that, I tried to hurt you. My grandma always said that what matters is not how a person starts a story, but how they finish it," Isadora said with her precocious wisdom. "You finished by saving me." That afternoon, for the first time since everything began, the house on Eucalyptus Hill was filled with genuine laughter. Isadora played in the garden, while Harrison and Claire talked on the porch, no longer as husband and wife. Some bonds had definitively broken, but as two people, united by the responsibility of caring for an extraordinary child. "What's going to happen to us now?" Claire asked. "I don't know," Harrison admitted. "But I know Isadora will have the best future we can provide. And maybe by helping her, we can find a way to move forward." It was a different ending than any of them had imagined when everything began on that scorching March afternoon. But it was an honest ending, built on painful truths and the determination to make good prevail over evil. 6 months after the hearing that changed Maplewood forever, life in the city had found a new rhythm. The streets seemed safer. Children played in the squares without the fear that once hung over the most vulnerable, and the community had come together in a way no one imagined possible. Isadora had turned 7 at a simple but loving party at the Child Protection Center, where the rescued children continued their healing process. Mary and Junior were present, along with 5 other children who had been found alive in operations in neighboring cities. "Make a wish, Izzy," Mary shouted as Isadora prepared to blow out the candles on her cake. "I already know what to wish." "For," she said, closing her eyes tightly before blowing. "What did you wish for?" Junior asked curiously. "That all the children in the world have a family that loves them," she replied simply. Harrison, who was watching the scene beside Dale, felt his chest tighten with emotion. Isadora's ability to think of others, even after all she had been through, continued to surprise him daily. "How are the legal proceedings going?" Dale asked. "Marcus was sentenced to 20 years. Big Mike got 15. Colonel Reynolds got a plea deal and will serve 10 years, but he had to return all the money we managed to trace. And the families who bought the children? Most will not be criminally prosecuted. The judge understood that they were also victims of the scheme, but some are voluntarily assisting in the investigation. At that moment, Isadora approached them, carrying a drawing she had made during the party. "Look what I drew," she said, proudly. The drawing showed a large tree with many branches, and on each branch there was a small house with smiling people. On the tree trunk, "Maplewood Family," was written in still childish but careful handwriting. "We're all one big family now," she explained. "Me, you, Mary, Junior, Aunt Dale, even Aunt Claire, all taking care of each other." It was a simple yet profound vision of the community that had formed around the tragedy they had faced together. 2 weeks later, unexpected news brought a new twist to Isadora's life. Dale arrived home. She had moved to a house near Harrison's, to always be close to the children, with an anxious expression on her face. "Isadora, I need to tell you something important," she said, sitting beside the girl in the living room. "Is it about my grandma?" Isadora asked intuitively. "It is, but it's also about you. Remember we found more papers in your grandma's house?" "I remember. Well, we discovered something about your family. You're not completely alone in the world." Isadora's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Your father, he's alive, and he didn't know you existed." The silence that followed was thick. Isadora processed the information with her characteristic maturity, but it was impossible to hide the confusion in her eyes. "My grandma never talked about him," she finally said, "because she thought he wouldn't want to take responsibility. But now that everything has come out, he knows about you and wants to meet you." "Is he a good person?" Dale hesitated. He made mistakes in the past, but he seems genuinely remorseful and wants to do the right thing now." Harrison, who had arrived home from work in the middle of the conversation, felt a pang of fear. He had grown accustomed to having Isadora as part of his life, and the possibility of losing her to her biological father terrified him. "What does this mean?" he asked. "It means we need a meeting between everyone involved," Dale replied. "Isadora has the right to know her father, but she also has the right to choose where she wants to live." The next day, the meeting took place in the same room where Isadora had given her first testimony months earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was one of nervous anticipation instead of fear. Isadora's father was a 35-year-old man named David Santos, a construction worker by trade, who had worked on various sites in the region for years. When he learned about Benedicta and the daughter he had never known, he dropped everything to come to Maplewood. "Hi, Isadora," he said when he saw her, his voice choked with emotion. I'm your father." Isadora studied him carefully, as she did with all new people she met. There was an undeniable physical resemblance, the same brown eyes, the same face shape. "Why did you never come to see me before?" she asked directly. "Because I didn't know you existed," David replied honestly. "Your mother, when she found out she was pregnant, I had already left town for work. She never managed to find me." "And why did you leave?" David lowered his head, clearly embarrassed. "Because I was young and irresponsible. I thought the whole world was in front of me and that commitments would only hold me back. And now I know that the biggest mistake of my life was not being here when you and your mother needed me." Isadora was silent for a long time, processing the answers. Finally, she asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Do you want me to live with you?" "I want you to be happy," David replied. "If that means living with me, great. If it means staying with the people who already care for you, I'll accept that. But I want to be a part of your life either way." The answer surprised Everyone, especially Harrison, who had prepared for a legal battle for custody. "Can I think about it for a bit?" Isadora asked. "Of course you can," said Judge Miller, who was mediating the meeting. "It's a very important decision." That night, Isadora talked at length with Harrison about her options. They were in the garden of the house, watching the birds that had grown accustomed to visiting them daily. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "I think you should follow your heart," Harrison replied, "but I also think you have the right to get to know your father better before making a final decision. And if I decide to go with him, will you be sad?" Harrison took a deep breath before answering. "I will be sad, yes. But I will also be happy because you will have a blood family, and most importantly, I will continue to be your friend forever. Even if I live far away? Even if you live in China," he said, making her laugh. 3 days later, Isadora made her decision. She wanted to get to know David better, but she didn't want to leave Maplewood. The city had become her home, and the people who had saved her were her chosen family. "Can I get to know my dad gradually?" she asked during a new meeting. "And can he live nearby so we can get to know each other better?" "Of course he can," said Judge Miller. "In fact, that's a very sensible solution." David, who had prepared to take Isadora away, was initially disappointed, but when he saw how she interacted with Harrison Dale, and especially with the other rescued children, he understood that she had found something precious in Maplewood. "All right," he said. "I'll look for work here in town. I want to be close to you, and I want to help raise you." And so, Isadora's unconventional family gained another member. David found work at Harrison's construction company, which had been completely restructured after the scandals, and moved into a small house 3 blocks from the mansion on Eucalyptus Hill. Little by little, father and daughter built a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. David didn't try to replace the role Harrison had assumed in Isadora's life, but found his own space as the father who wanted to be present from then on. Life in Maplewood had become a living demonstration that families can be formed by love and choice, not just by blood. And at the center of it all was a 7-year-old girl who had taught an entire city that truth, no matter how painful, always prevails over lies. A year after David's arrival in Maplewood, the city was preparing for an event that would definitively mark the end of a cycle of pain and the beginning of a new era. The first child protection center, built with money recovered from criminals, was to be inaugurated, and Isadora had been invited to cut the ribbon. "I'm nervous," she confessed to Harrison as he adjusted the bow on her new dress, a light blue that enhanced her brown eyes, now bright with the security of someone who knew she was loved. "It's normal to be nervous," he said. "But remember, you're not alone. We'll all be there with you. Even Aunt Claire? Even Aunt Claire." Claire had become an unexpected figure in Isadora's life. After her recovery, she had dedicated herself entirely to social work, using her influence in local high society to raise funds for children's causes. The vain and superficial woman had transformed into a fierce advocate for children's rights. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" Isadora said, looking out the window of the room where she had slept so many nights since arriving at that house. "What?" "That now other children will have a safe place to sleep when they need it." On the morning of the inauguration, Isadora's entire expanded family gathered at the house on Eucalyptus Hill. David arrived early, bringing a gift he had made personally, a hand-painted birdhouse with vibrant colors. "For the center's garden," he explained, "so the birds can also have a safe home." Mary and Junior arrived soon after, accompanied by Dale and 3 other rescued children. Everyone wore special clothes for the occasion, but more importantly, everyone carried genuine smiles, something that seemed impossible months earlier. "Izzy," Mary said. "Do you remember when we slept in the square and dreamed that one day we'd have a real home?" "I remember," Isadora replied, "but now we have something better." "What's better than a home?" "A family." The inauguration ceremony was simple but moving. The mayor, elected in a clean election after the scandals, gave a speech about how Maplewood had learned that protecting its children was protecting its future. Prosecutor Monica Hayes spoke about how the courage of a 6-year-old girl had changed the justice system of the entire region. But it was when Isadora approached the microphone that the true meaning of that moment was revealed. "My name is Isadora Santos Silva," she began, now using her full surname that included her mother's memory. "A year ago, I slept on the streets and was afraid of almost everything. Today, I'm here to inaugurate a place where no child will have to be afraid." Her voice, stronger and more confident than before, echoed through the crowd gathered in the square. "My grandma Benedicta always told me to keep everything in my head, that one day it would be important. She was right. But now I've learned something. No, it's important to keep the bad things so they don't happen again, but it's even more important to keep the good things so they always come back." When she cut the red ribbon that adorned the center's entrance, the applause was deafening, but the most moving moment came soon after, when the first 5 children, all in vulnerable social situations, entered the building to see what would be their new temporary home. "It's really pretty," said an 8-year-old girl, looking at the colorful rooms and the library full of children's books. "And it's safe," Isadora added. "No one here will hurt you or use you for bad things." That afternoon, one last surprise awaited everyone. Judge Miller announced that an official letter had arrived from Washington, D.C. The U.S. Department of Justice had decided to create a national program based on the Maplewood model, and they wanted Isadora to be the project's child ambassador. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means you'll travel across the country telling your story to other children, showing that there's always hope," Judge Miller explained. "But I won't live far from here, right?" "No, your trips would be short, and you'd always come back home." Isadora looked around, seeing all the faces that had become so important to her. Harrison, who had been her first source of security. Dale, who had fought tirelessly for justice. David, who had chosen to be a present father. Claire, who had found redemption in caring for others. Mary and Junior, who shared with her the scars and the healing. And so many others who had become part of her chosen family. "I accept," she finally said, "but only if all of you help me." "How?" Harrison asked. "By coming with me on the important trips, because my strength doesn't just come from me, it comes from all of us together." 6 months later, Isadora took her first official trip as an ambassador for the national program. She went to Los Angeles, where children in situations similar to hers awaited her in a crowded auditorium. "Hi, my name is Isadora," she said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "I'm 8 years old, and I want to tell you a story. It's a sad story at the beginning, but it has a happy ending. And I'm here to tell you that your story can have a happy ending too." For an hour, she told her journey, from nights sleeping on the streets to becoming the key to dismantling a corruption network that hurt children. But most importantly, she spoke about love, about family, about how good adults exist and are willing to fight for children. "The most important thing I learned," she said at the end of her presentation, "is that no child needs to go through bad things alone. There's always someone willing to help. Sometimes that person is right in front of us, sometimes we need to look a little, but they always exist." When she returned to Maplewood that night, she found her entire family gathered in the garden of the house on Eucalyptus Hill, waiting to hear about her first trip. "How was it?" Mary asked eagerly. "It was good," Isadora said, "but do you know what was better?" "What?" "Knowing that at the end of the day I would come home to you." At that moment, watching that extraordinary girl surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, Harrison understood that he had witnessed something much bigger than a story of personal triumph. He had witnessed how love can transform tragedy into hope, how truth can prevail over corruption, and how a brave child can change not only her own life, but the life of an entire community. The garden filled with laughter as Isadora began to imitate the children she had met in Los Angeles, telling their stories with the affection and seriousness she dedicated to everything she considered important. And there, under the stars of rural America, a family built by love continued to grow, living proof that happy endings are possible when the right people come together for the right reasons. The girl who had once been tied to a pole as punishment for stealing a bread roll had become the voice of thousands of vulnerable children across the country. And her greatest triumph was not fame or recognition, but the fact that never again would a child need to sleep alone and scared on the streets of Maplewood. 2 years had passed since that scorching March afternoon when Harrison first saw a girl tied to a pole in Maplewood's Central Square. Now, on a sunny September morning, Isadora was celebrating her 9th birthday, surrounded by a family that had grown beyond all expectations. The party was held in the garden of the Child Protection Center, which had become the heart of the new Maplewood. Children of all ages ran among the tables decorated with colorful balloons, their laughter echoing through the space that had once been just an impossible dream. 9 already, David said, watching his daughter distribute pieces of cake to the younger children. Seems like just yesterday I met her. To me, it feels like a lifetime, Harrison replied, but his tone carried no sadness. It was the satisfaction of someone who had lived every moment of an extraordinary journey to the fullest. Mary, now 10 years old and already showing interest in following Dale's footsteps as a social worker, approached with a wrapped gift in her hands. "Izzy, this present is from all of us you helped save," she said, handing over the carefully wrapped package. Inside was a photo album the children had put together. Each page told part of their collective journey, from the first photos in the hospital through moments of recovery to the most recent images of happy and safe children. "On the first page," Junior explained, "we put a photo of you sleeping in the square that Aunt Dale found in the investigation file." Isadora looked at the photograph, a small, scared girl, curled up among cardboard boxes, her eyes closed, but her face tense even in sleep. "And on the last page," Mary continued, "we put yesterday's photo when you came back from New York." The last photograph showed Isadora at the airport, being greeted by her entire extended family, her radiant smile contrasting completely with the scared child in the first image. "It's so you never forget how much you've grown," said one of the younger children, "and so we never forget who taught us that we could grow too." At that moment, an unexpected visitor arrived, making everyone turn. It was Marcus Thorne, accompanied by 2 prison guards. He had requested special authorization to leave prison for a few hours to do something he considered essential. The silence that fell was tense. Many of those present still carried deep resentment for what that man had done. But Isadora, with her impressive maturity, was the first to approach. "Hi, Mr. Thorne," she said simply. "Hi, Isadora." His voice was different, weaker, tinged with a regret that seemed genuine. I came to apologize. To you and to all. The children I hurt." "Why now?" she asked directly. "Because I spent 2 years in prison thinking about everything I did. And I understood that some things can't wait. I need you to know that I truly regret it." Marcus took an envelope from his pocket. "This is for the center. These are the coordinates of 3 more properties where we kept children. Places I never revealed during the trial. Maybe there's still evidence that can help find more missing children. Dale took the envelope carefully. "Why didn't you tell this before?" "Because I was a coward. But this girl," he said, looking at Isadora, "taught me that courage has no age. If a 6-year-old child can face a room full of powerful adults to tell the truth, a 50-year-old man can at least try to mend some of the harm he caused." Isadora looked at the man who had once been her biggest threat. Now he seemed small, fragile, broken by the weight of his own choices. "Mr. Thorne," she said after a long silence, "you hurt a lot of children, and that will never stop being true. I know, but you're also trying to help now, and that's also true. Do you forgive me?" Isadora thought carefully before answering. "My grandma always told me that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let anger take over our hearts. So yes, I forgive you, but that doesn't change what you need to do to fix what you broke." When Marcus left, the party continued, but with a different atmosphere. There was a sense of closure, as if a final painful chapter had finally ended. In the afternoon, when most guests had already left, Isadora's nuclear family gathered on the center's porch for a conversation that had been postponed for months. "Isadora," Dale said, "a very special proposal has arrived. The federal government wants to create a permanent institute for child protection, and they want you to be the first child to chair the Children's Council." "What does that mean?" "It means you would have an official voice in decisions about policies for children across the country," Judge Miller explained, who had become a close family friend. "But it also means big responsibilities and frequent travel. And it also means," Harrison added, "that you would have to set aside part of your childhood to take on adult responsibilities." Isadora was silent for a long time, swinging her legs on the porch chair and watching the children still playing in the garden. "Can I ask a question?" she finally said. "Of course," Dale replied. "If I say no, will other children still need help?" "They will," Judge Miller answered honestly. "But other people can also help. You've already done more than any child should have to do. And if I say yes, will I be able to help more children? Probably yes." Isadora stood up and walked to the porch railing, watching Maplewood stretch out before her. The city had changed so much since her arrival. The streets seemed more colorful, the squares busier, the children safer. "Do you know what my birthday wish was this year?" she asked. "No," David said. "What did you wish for?" "I wished that I would always know how to do the right thing, even when it was difficult." She turned to face her entire family. "I accept being part of the Children's Council, but on one condition." "What?" Harrison asked. "That all of you continue to be my family, that Maplewood continues to be my home, and that when I get too tired of being the girl who speaks for others, I can come back here and just be the Isadora you love forever," Claire promised, who had remained quiet during the entire conversation. "This will always be your home, and we will always be your family." That night, Isadora was in her room at the Eucalyptus Hill house. She had chosen to continue living with Harrison and Claire, visiting David regularly when Harrison came to say goodnight. "Are you sure about your decision about the council?" he asked. "I am." "Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because my grandma prepared me for this my whole life. She taught me to keep everything in my head because she knew that one day I would need to speak for children who can't speak for themselves. And aren't you scared?" "I am, but fear isn't a reason not to do the right thing." Harrison kissed the forehead of the girl who had changed his life in ways he never imagined possible. "Good night, my heart's daughter." "Good night, Dad." And so, under the stars of rural America, a girl who had begun her journey tied to a pole for stealing a bread roll was preparing to become the official voice of millions of vulnerable children across the country. Her story had begun with suffering, undergone a painful but necessary transformation, and was now heading towards a future where her courage and precocious wisdom could impact generations. Most importantly, however, she would not make this journey alone. Surrounded by a family built by love and choice, supported by a community that had learned the value of protecting its children, Isadora Santos Silva was ready to face any challenge the future brought, because she had learned the most important lesson of all, that when good people come together for just causes, even the most difficult beginnings can have the most hopeful endings.